So I haven't been podcasting for 3 months already. Oh my, what have I been doing? I was busy with consulting gigs and facilitated 8 weeks agile leadership cohort for a client. I also started traveling early July to facilitate several in-person trainings, mainly around Southeast Asia. So last May, I was supposed to share about why I became a professional Scrum Trainer because in May 2022 was my 1 decade anniversary as a professional Scrum Trainer through Scrum.org. In today's podcast episode, folks, let's get personal. If you want to know the reason why I became a professional Scrum Trainer, stick around.
What's happening, awesome Scrum Masters? Are you ready for another food for thought to improve your Scrum Mastery? The journey towards becoming a Scrum Master is challenging but rewarding. Today's podcast is brought to you by a Scrum.org professional Scrum Trainer and a coactive coach with over 15 years experience inspiring and enabling aspiring Scrum Masters like you. So buckle up and get ready. From Brisbane, Australia, here's your host, Joshua Partogi.
Hey, what's good this week, everybody? I hope you had a great week, a great day, wherever or whenever you are listening to today's podcast episode. Before I share with you the reason why I became a professional Scrum Trainer, I would like to tell you some housekeeping stuff related to this podcast. So I'm cleaning up my YouTube channel, Scrum Master in Black, and moving out all of the videos that do not fit with the theme of that channel into a separate channel. So I have moved out all of the Think and Act Like a Scrum Master video podcast onto its own YouTube channel. The channel name on YouTube for this podcast is the same as the podcast name, that is Think and Act Like a Scrum Master. And on top of that, the video podcast episodes will also be available on Spotify. Now, I just realized that Spotify now enables us podcasters to upload the video version of our podcast episodes. Really interesting. Alright folks, let's get back to today's podcast episode topic, why I became a professional Scrum Trainer. So around March 2022, one of the participants in my live virtual training asked me, why did I become a professional Scrum Trainer? She asked me this question because she noticed that the videos I uploaded to the Scrum Master in Black channel are quite different from videos from other content creators who also talk about Scrum. So I guess the story why I wanted to become a professional Scrum Trainer through Scrum.org go as far back as 2006. This is when I just graduated from university and got my first job. So I've always been fascinated with humans. Some of you may not know that I have a background in psychology. And on the other side, I like software development. So in my days in university, I like coding, mainly in Java. And I also like making websites using PHP. Back then, people liked to use PHP either to make their own websites or make websites for their clients. And Java was not really popular, mainly because it's too cumbersome, it's too heavy. A lot of university students, like in my days, they don't like touching Java. But there were quite many companies who was willing to pay a lot of money for Java developers. Because companies who likes to use Java are large corporations like banks. So that's why they're willing to pay a lot of money for Java developers. So in short, the turning point that led me to discover Scrum was a horrible experience that I had in my first job. So my first job was with a software development as service company. They had a contract and a project from their client, which was a large car manufacturing company. The project was to rewrite the enterprise resource planning that was built on SAP to a custom development with Java. The Java framework they used was struts and a custom component they made using Enterprise Java Beans or AJB. I'm not sure if you've heard of these two frameworks before. Yeah, you can tell that I'm quite old already, knowing the technology I used back then. I think it's not that popular these days, struts and AJB. So this project was forecasted to be completed in 1 year, but the recent information that I got was the project was finally completed in more than 2 years. But not only that, the product that was delivered also came with many more issues with it. So when I joined the project had just begun and ran for 1 month. And the business analyst like in any waterfall projects, was still gathering requirements from the users. So the business analyst was not already with the engineers because the business analyst had not come up with the requirements from the end users yet. So the engineers was learning the technology and also setting up the development environment for developing the product. Now, several weeks later, the business analyst came with a bunch of requirements written on Microsoft Word documents. And we had been told by the project manager that we had 6 months to develop the product, and all we had to do was just follow whatever specification that the business analyst had written down on the Microsoft Word documents. There was no communication with the other software engineers, and all we had to do was just follow whatever is written on the Microsoft Word documents. The software engineers did not communicate with one another to ensure that the module or the component is integrated well together, to ensure that the user experience from one screen to another screen was seamless and it was great. There was none of that at all. And I felt that was kind of wrong because sometimes I felt there could be a better user experience when the user is using the screen that I developed to the screen that was developed by another engineers. Now, every month, the project manager found that this project was most likely going to be late. And what he did was he recruited several more engineers to speed up the development. And I think after the 4th or the 5th month, as I remember, there were around 40 software engineers, from 10 to 40 in 4 to 5 months. And the testers was not recruited yet at the 5th month because this is how the project was managed. It was managed using waterfall process, so the testers was not already joined in the project. Now, at the 6th month of the project managers perhaps realized that this project is most likely going to be late. So he came up with this brilliant idea to force people to work in the office late until 9 p.m. and people were required to work on weekends, on Saturday and Sunday. He did compensate people, like there was an overtime money for working until that late and also including the weekends. But I thought that was insane. And interestingly, nobody else felt anything wrong with it. Whenever I talk to my colleagues during lunchtime or during breaks regarding this matter, people seems to be quiet about it. They felt there's nothing wrong with this. This is how project is done. More specifically, this is how projects with waterfall is done. Anyway, after 9 months, I kind of have a hunch and predicted that this project was going to fail because the way how it's done, there was no collaboration. There is too much reliance on communication through documentation. There is no face-to-face human interaction between the analysts, the engineers, and the testers. And there was no testing built in. How for 5 months, there was no testers or quality assurance done. There was a wishful thinking if the engineers just follow what was written on the documentation, and if we test it at the end, things will work out correctly. And I kind of feel that was not really empirical now that I realize, now that I know Scrum. I think there was too many assumptions going on there. It was not empirical. There was no continuous deployment to a production-like environment because Remember when I mentioned earlier the technology they use was enterprise Java beans? This technology is resourceful and it's really heavy. Doing continuous deployment, let's say using Jenkins, it would consume a lot of resources from the deployment servers. Most of all, I knew it was going to fail because it was led using a top-down authoritarian approach that perceived the engineers as a feature factory. At one point in time, I wonder, is this how bad software development is? Could there be a better way of developing software? So I got fed up and I decided not following the project manager's game. I decided to leave the office at 5 p.m. every day, and I never came every weekend. I never came every Saturday and Sunday. I was just so bold not following his game. At the 9th month, I found out a hole in the system that was developed, how data can be manipulated through the URL of the software. And I got fired for that reason. Not only because I explained how the system got a hole, but he just didn't like me not following his game, not coming every Saturday and Sunday and working until 9 p.m. And he think that I'm not a team player because of that reason. Somehow I felt relieved that he fired me. So in this case, the company needs to pay me for the remaining salary because the contract was 1 year. They need to pay the remaining 3 months salary. So I felt that was great because I can just wait and think about my next move with that additional money so I can survive for 3 months and ponder what I should do next. So after I got fired, I went to do research on whether there's a better approach for developing software that does not use an authoritarian model or more specifically waterfall processes that separates the people, that separates analysts, engineers, and also testers. Could there be an approach where analysts, engineers, and testers just work together, starting from the beginning of the project and throughout the project? At that time, my research got me to Scrum. And from my discovery, I purchased several books on Scrum, mainly the ones that were written by Ken Schwaber. And when I read his book, I was so impressed by how he also challenged the traditional way of developing software that was led using top-down approach, that was using assumptions rather than empirical process, and also projects that was not done at a sustainable pace. Wow, I thought all of the things he wrote down in his book just resonate with the experience I just had. So several months later, because I was not really in a period in looking for another job, because as I mentioned, I got like money that can help me survive for 3 months. Serendipity happened. A director of a company in Australia contacted me through phone and asked me whether I wanted to work in their company in Australia. So this director has been observing me, the posts, the comments that I made, all of the answers that I wrote to people in the Java user group community and also on Stack Overflow. Wow, I said, that is so amazing how people use mailing lists and Stack Overflow for finding talents in the market. And interestingly, besides all thing else, I only asked this director whether the team in his company were using Scrum. Like, Out of everything else I could ask him, that's the only thing I asked him. And he told me that the company was using an iterative approach, not specifically Scrum, but he told me that I was supported, I was allowed to convince the team to use Scrum if I wanted to. So I thought, okay, let's try it. At least the company is open for a different approach for developing software. I accepted the offer, bought a ticket to Australia. At the time, the company is based in New South Wales. So I've never been there. I've never been to a university in Australia. So this was a really interesting experience for me, moving to another country as a software engineer. Now, when I moved to Australia and joined the team, I immediately felt there is a different vibe in the way people there work together. I think people are so collaborative. There was psychological safety. People can ask questions. People can challenge each other's thoughts and ideas and opinions. There was no hierarchy in the team. There was someone who led the development, but that person is not a project manager or a technical leader. These people still write codes, and they're more like a servant leader. Even though at that time, because they don't label it as Scrum, they don't call this person as a Scrum Master. But I can say that these leaders are more like a servant leader rather than authoritarian leader who force people or lead by using fear. Sometimes people in the company do pair programming. You often see people do pair programming for several hours to solve a complex problem. People there are working at a sustainable pace. So I would never see people working late after 5 p.m. until midnight. So that was great. And at that time, there was a Jenkins instance that continuously integrate, test, and deploy the system to a production-like environment. The technology they used was more lightweight. They didn't use AJB. So I guess it's possible for them to do continuous integration because of the choice of technology. And interestingly, if I remember, this company does not have a dedicated tester. The principle is everyone tests. Everyone in the team should ensure that quality is baked in. Quality or testing is not only the tester's responsibility. Everyone was working together to ensure that quality is baked in. Now, at one point in time, I knew that the team was not really using Scrum, but I must say the working experience I had there was so much better than the previous company I was in. This realization got me interested to learn how the actual Scrum is supposed to be. So I personally think this company is closer to Scrum. It was not waterfall, indeed. It's an iterative model. There was continuous delivery. But I think the team was more focused on the engineering aspects. I think the missing pieces at that time was from the business aspect, how engineers working together throughout the project with the business people. And if you look at the Agile Manifesto, this is one of the 12 principles, business people and engineers working together throughout the project. So I decided to take a certified Scrum Master training from Scrum Alliance. The training was held in Sydney. The training was actually really practical. During the training, one of the simulation was to make a doggy daycare poster iteratively in 3 sprints. It was quite practical and it was fun because we did lots of games on top of making doggy daycare posters. I had a great 2 days experience in the training, but when I came back to the office and one of the company directors asked me what the Scrum Master is accountable for, I remember I was frozen. I didn't know how to answer that question. But I think it was a legit question. Every Scrum Master should know what is their accountability, especially if you have attended a Scrum Master training, right? Because it's a Scrum Master training. So you should know from the training what is the Scrum Master's accountability. But I was not able to answer that legit question from the company's director. And that actually made me really disappointed with the training itself. And after that experience, I also found there wasn't any consistency in the CSM training material, because every Scrum Alliance trainer can make their own training material. And I found there was one Scrum Alliance CSM training in 3 days and focused more on technical practices needed with Scrum. Other Scrum Alliance trainers focus on converting waterfall project management approach to Scrum approach. Another Scrum Alliance trainer only emphasizes Scrum at the team level and neglects the Scrum Master role at the organization at the corporate level. So I thought, this is such a mess. No wonder I was not able to get a clear cut of the Scrum Master's accountability even after attending a 2-day CSM training. There is no consistency, there is no standards. Every certified Scrum trainer was allowed to deliver whatever material they see fit. So on some occasions after that, several months after that, in the company, I became a self-claimed Scrum Master. So I decided, okay, the only way for me to know more about Scrum is just to jump on board and become a Scrum Master. Everyone, the team, the company's director supported that decision. There was no hesitation from them. So I became a self-claimed Scrum Master because Scrum Master was not really a job title that was formally approved by the company. My job title was still a Java software engineer. So I tried running Scrum in that team, and we also tried putting more Scrum events that were still lacking. That's the sprint planning, sprint review, and also the sprint retrospectives. But even after doing all of the Scrum events, I felt the customer is still missing. I personally thought at that time the client is supposed to be the product owner. At that time, the product owner role was sort of filled by the most senior engineers who interacts the most with the customer. So the product owner was not the real customer, the person who fund or has the budget for developing the software. At that time, the team or the company came with that decision because most of their projects was government projects. So the majority of the clients are government agencies from Australia. Getting these people to sprint planning, sprint review, and sprint retrospectives was challenging. And especially the majority of the projects was already agreed using waterfall contract. So midway through, going to Scrum was challenging. So I kind of hit the roof at that time, and I thought I really needed mentoring, and I really needed a reliable source who can teach me good Scrum. I did not have a good experience going to Scrum Alliance CSM training. I felt that even though it was fun, but it's lacking girth in it. There's not much body in the whole training content. So I tried to join the Scrum Alliance ring to be a trainer, but somehow I found there are too many loopholes in the process of becoming a certified Scrum trainer. And I also felt that at that time, it seems to be a very exclusive community, as I did not get a good experience getting my Scrum information from Scrum Alliance and how exclusive the trainer community seems to be, I decided to go with another path. And interestingly, around 2009, Ken Schwaber had issues with Scrum Alliance, and he decided to form his own Scrum organization, which he called Scrum.org. And when I read his blog post about his rant about Scrum Alliance, somehow many of the points he wrote there kind of resonates with my personal experience with Scrum Alliance. So several months after he wrote that blog post, he posted that he ran a 2 days professional Scrum Master training. This was going to be a good opportunity for me to learn good Scrum directly from the person who created it, Ken Schwaber. So at that time, the class was held in New York. And at that time, I was still in Australia. I signed up for it. I saved up money and went to his class in New York. Now, knowing that this class was trained by Ken Schwaber himself, I have a different level of expectations. During his PSM class in New York, I was really inspired because the kind of Scrum that he taught emphasized more on integrity, transparency, and also leading by serving others rather than using fear or authority or force. That really inspired me because many of the contents in his PSM training was not really about Scrum. It's more about leadership, which was awesome. Like, it was beyond my expectation. I thought this was the missing puzzle that I didn't get when I attended CSM training. I was inspired by the message that he sent across as I finally realized at that time that the Scrum Master role is very critical to transform the whole company to become more agile. Yet this role in the industry has been watered down. And especially in the CSM training that I attended, the Scrum Master role was watered down. It was not clear what is the Scrum Master supposed to do in the company. So Ken also shared that some of the best Scrum Masters he has worked with are the ones who have the courage to push transparency in the company to the limit and weren't afraid of getting fired for doing so. Now, after the training, I actually had more questions than answers from Ken. But a few days after the training, I realized that Ken was just being a Scrum Master throughout the training. He was being a coach. He wore his coach hat during the PSM training by not giving answers. But he wants us to discover the answers ourselves. He wants us to be empirical, which is the core of what Scrum is about. That was a really awesome experience that I had in that 2 days training from the master himself. After that moment, I was inspired and decided to resign from the company I worked with and do freelance Scrum Master work and do several Scrum training. So I told myself, if I'm going to be the person who is not afraid of getting fired, I need to have a safety net, because if I work with someone else and if I'm going to be that person pushing the needle, then I get fired, that would be scary because I've been fired from my first job. So at that time, I thought working for someone else was too risky. And at that time, interestingly, my wife and I were actually expecting our firstborn. But she said that if I believed that this was the best decision for my career and this was the best decision for the family, she said she would support me all the way. So until May 2012, I did several Scrum training independently with the best knowledge I had and the experience I had to clients who wanted me to deliver Scrum training. I also did several public trainings back then. So I traveled around Southeast Asia, mainly to Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia to deliver the public trainings. I did still keep in touch with Ken Schwaber at that time, and he was very supportive in answering several of my questions. And at that time, people were not really into Scrum. Scrum was still really new, specifically in Southeast Asia. Many people at that time thought that Waterfall was still great for their projects. They don't see anything wrong with Waterfall yet. And also, people still think, well, there's not much Scrum Master job position in the job market anyway. So people feel there is no pressure for them to implement Scrum or even become a Scrum Master. So fast forward, in May 2012, I decided to join Scrum.org as a professional Scrum trainer. It was still a small startup company back then in 2012, with Ken still leading and managing Scrum.org. I think there was several people helping Ken to administer the operation. I know Daphne Harris was already working with Scrum.org and still do until today. She's quite a lovely person, helped me throughout the process becoming a professional Scrum trainer. So before I was accepted to join Scrum.org, Ken gave me a simple thought-provoking question. So he asked me, "Are you sure you want to do this?" So I asked myself, if I was not sure, why would I decide to come to you and sign up to be a PST? Several months later, after teaching 3 PSM classes, I finally understood what Ken meant when he asked that question. So being a PST is not an easy job. First, back then, the market was quite small compared to Scrum Alliance market. There was only a handful of trainers from Scrum.org back then. I think back then in Scrum Alliance, there was already more than hundreds of trainers. And secondly, what's hard of being a professional Scrum trainer, because we weren't expected only to teach Scrum in the classroom. We are expected to be the role model, the mirror of what Scrum Master is. And that's hard because we can only be a role model if we also do the same thing outside of the classroom. So 10 years later, I'm still here. I'm still speaking out the truth in all of my Scrum.org classes. Yes, sometimes I've been asked to get out of the meeting room by the senior leaders of the company, or they would not contact me for an engagement because they don't like hearing the brutal truth that I told them. The brutal truth, the bitter truth that they have to do before implementing Scrum. So, I don't know how long I'm going to continue being a PST. It has been a long 10 years journey. It's been great. It's been a great 10 years journey. But I will still be who I am, speak out the truth, have integrity, leading by serving. Everything in the Scrum framework just fits with my personality, I guess. And I guess that's what keeps driving me forward and still persistent in doing this. All right, so that was it, folks. I think this has been quite a long podcast episode. I might make another podcast episode that will contain that 10 years journey, because this podcast episode only explains how I became a professional Scrum trainer. Thank you, though, for listening to my podcast episode. I hope you found some nuggets in today's episode. It's a long episode, but hope you found some nuggets in there. And perhaps those nuggets can inspire you. I will see you again on my next podcast episode or on my regular videos, both on the Think and Act Like a Scrum Master YouTube channel and also the other channel, Scrum Master in Black. Until next time, folks, take care, be curious, and also stay awesome.